Okay, welcome back to the Magic Internet Money Podcast. I've been on a year-long hiatus, actually longer than that, probably a year and a half at this point since the last episode. But I've been working hard and getting the proof of work in. Um, the first episode that I'm doing, in a while, is with Roger Hamilton, which is timely because everybody's talking about the Bitcoin strategic reserve and the reserve strategy. And I was pinged by multiple people in my Bitcoin circle that your company is implementing the Bitcoin reserve strategy. And I thought, I'm not quite ready to boot the Magic Internet Money podcast back up yet, but hey, we should have a conversation because what you're doing sounds very interesting. I'm not a shareholder in your company yet, depending on how this conversation goes, I guess. But I typically don't do stocks and shares and things like that, equities. I'm more of a Bitcoin only type of guy, but I don't even have any MSTR. But I'm cheering everybody on, and I'm trying to do my best to educate people why they would want to adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve for their personal finances, for their family, and for their corporation. So I don't really have quite the depth of knowledge in public companies and corporations, and hopefully you can both like explain to us what you're doing and educate us as well a little bit on that side of things, because a lot of us Bitcoiners are, we got out of the traditional system because of reasons, and now it's like, oh, look at all these guys that are doing Bitcoin adoption in the equities markets and in public companies. So it's kind of fascinating for me to want to listen to your story and hear about, how did you find Bitcoin, Roger? Um, what's your strategy for Bitcoin long term, and why did you adopt Bitcoin personally and for your company? So those are some topics I'd love to kind of go into, but maybe first you want to give a little introduction for yourself and your company.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually in Bali at the moment in Indonesia, and I've been out here for I would say close to 2 decades now. My kids were brought up in Bali at the Green School. I actually moved out to Singapore soon after now we're going back about 30 years. Soon after I got my architecture degree in Cambridge University in England. And the reason I came out here and the reason I became an entrepreneur really came down to one person. His name was Buckminster Fuller. We were studying him as an architect. He's the guy who created the geodesic dome. He came up with the idea of, spaceship Earth. And he said, and I was, reading about this, and I met a lot of the guys that worked with him when he was still alive. He said that way back in the 1970s, we were entering a final exam, like humanity was entering a final exam. And he said that this final exam is our last exam. It's basically us against the machine. And he said that we're in a situation where technology can solve all the world's problems, and the only reason we haven't solved them is human consciousness. So we have two choices. Now, we're either going to increase human consciousness to the extent where we actually figure out the systems and the ways for us to be able to harness all this incredible technology that's coming, or it's going to keep on growing exponentially and eventually it will destroy us. And when I heard that, this was way before people were talking about singularity and AGI. It's before people were talking about blockchain. But it basically led me down a pathway which is really the genesis of Genius Group, and the whole idea that there is a way to re-educate humanity for the future. And this is where everything from the kind of decentralized systems which will be based on the future, the kind of money that AI would create if it had a chance to create AI, create money, and what that would look like. That this was all part and parcel of basically the journey into not just Web3, blockchain, but also Bitcoin. And so at the very, very beginning, we're going back now to about 2011, 2012. I joined Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil in the Singularity University. So flying out from Bali over to LA and Silicon Valley and back again. And during that time also running something called the Entrepreneur Summit throughout Asia, where we were basically bringing some of the very, very early Bitcoin adopters out when Bitcoin was like $2, $3, and talking about what the future of not just economies but money would look like as well. So that's pretty much how I got into all of this. Frankly, the IPO on New York Stock Exchange happened only 2 years ago, and that's a whole different story about how what we were doing, which is very, very decentralized, and a community of many millions of students around the world, suddenly became a very centralized system where we were now under the SEC, New York Stock Exchange, and all of the things that happen once you become a public company, which is a very, very different thing from where we used to be. So for example, we had a cryptocurrency we had set up. We had to reject all of that the moment we became publicly listed because SEC didn't want to hear about it. We wanted to be on a blockchain-based stock market, which had a 0T settlement and no short selling. We weren't able to do that. We had to delist from that because of SEC not being happy with that. And frankly, this whole story of the Bitcoin Treasury, it really got triggered by the change in administration a couple of weeks ago, because that was what changed everything, right? Like suddenly we can start talking about this. I met Michael Saylor back in March, April time, again back with Peter Diamandis at his event, and at that he was already saying, at that point he's saying, hey, I went from 600 million to a $30 billion business. Obviously it's much bigger now, but it was all part and parcel of him talking about how pretty much the entire centralized system is toxic assets, and until you really get that Bitcoin is the exit to all of that, you're going to be stuck just working like crazy for what is fundamentally a collapsing currency. And that's why we decided to embrace the Bitcoin Treasury concept, and we're on our track towards 1,000 Bitcoin in our treasury pretty much as soon as possible.
Oh, that's awesome. So, you're talking about being inspired by Buckminster Fuller's philosophies, and it does kind of seem that if you believe in empowering individual sovereignty and maximizing resources and being efficient with resources, then yeah, you should be drawn to Bitcoin. And I wonder, like, was there something about have you looked into the kind of synergistics between those philosophies and Bitcoin mining and stuff? Like, do you dive deep down the rabbit hole into Bitcoin mining and the energy use and things like that, or are you kind of more core focused on where Bitcoin's going as a way to protect the company's treasury or provide more value to shareholders? Like, how do you think about it more so?
It's definitely more than just how to protect the company. It's about where the future is going. I had an interview earlier this week with Forbes magazine where they're saying, what's the thesis behind GNS getting involved in a Bitcoin treasury? And I said, look, we are moving into a 12 to 24 month period where everyone from Sam Altman to Elon Musk believe we're going to hit AGI. The only way that AI can speak with AI is through tokens, right? Like, you have to incentivize an AI to do something through a token. So they're going to build their own currency. When they build their own currency, they are going to be saying, okay, what would be the ideal currency which allows us to work 24/7 to build whatever value we want within whatever businesses or organizations we're creating. Already the Jensen Huangs of the world are talking about there being 100 billion AI agents, and Elon Musk is saying there's going to be 10 billion robots. So robots are going to outnumber humans. And as when you got a Tesla car that's going to be just communicating with the solar panels and basically incentivizing them through a currency they build, it is clearly going to be in the blockchain. It's clearly going to be underwritten by something that cannot be debased. It's clearly going to be built in such a way that if you were to look at all of the different potential digital goals that it's going to underwrite against the currency, is going to have to be Bitcoin. And in the same way that the SEC has been outlawing cryptos, this AI economy, which is going to be, I think, 10 to 100 times the size of the economy that we built, is going to outlaw any fiat currency. It's going to outlaw the US dollar, right? So if you've got US dollars right now, you're not going to be able to use them online in a couple of years' time, or certainly within 5 to 10 years' time. So if you just think about where things are going, this is no different from what happened, during the American independence, when pretty much America was using French francs and British pounds, which were being massively debased, and said, no, we're going to create our own currency. This is no different from buying land in Manhattan, when you can see that, look, if the US dollar becomes the global reserve currency, and Manhattan becomes the center for the entire building of that global economy, having land in Manhattan is going to be a good thing. We've got a Manhattan for this entire new future, and Bitcoin is the land, right? So if you have the chance to buy into that land, you should do it. That's why we decided to go down this pathway. We have people in our community from all over the world. We've got people in New Zealand that have been building gold vaults there for a while that are now getting into crypto vaults. We've been spending time within our communities around the world, talking about things like the sovereign individual, long before it became fashionable in Silicon Valley, which is all about basically this new future. And even that was predicting Bitcoin, back in the 1980s. So, the fact that this has all been predicted, one of my most viral videos has been about the fourth turning, and about the fact that we are in this space right now where we are seeing the destruction of the old world order and a brand new picture of where things can be. And Ray Dalio also said 2025 was the year when the US dollar is going to collapse. And I think it's pretty much bang on target. We're actually in hyperinflation already with the US dollar against Bitcoin. We're already there. So we actually look and say, well, if when I was in South Africa, and we went and visited Zimbabwe, and heard the stories, met with the entrepreneurs who were working so hard when Zimbabwean dollar was in hyperinflation. It doesn't matter how hard you work, right? If basically your dollar is only worth half as much, the month after, then of course, at some point the whole thing's going to collapse. But those guys that actually figured out how to switch from Zimbabwe dollars into US dollars are the ones that were successful. So, when at the moment people talk about buying Bitcoin, what they're really doing is exiting fiat. And thinking about it that way and seeing where things are moving is a big part of the philosophy that we've been talking about all the way through this entire 2-decade period. And now we're in that 12 to 24 month final exam, as Buckminster Fuller says, when we either pass it or fail it. And it all depends on basically whether you're going all into this new economy or not.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of those principles seem to line up with the future of where we're going with AI agents and Bitcoin as the growth engine for individuals to retain, whether it's sovereignty or autonomy, at least in a legal system. I mean, you can't have full sovereignty if you live in a country that doesn't value property rights, but you can have some autonomy, and you can have the optionality to exit to a better jurisdiction to get your sovereignty. But the concept of the AI agents, I'm totally over my head, because I kind of broke my brain a little bit trying to think about that last year, 2 years ago. And one of the last episodes I did on the podcast actually was with Liron Shapira. He's the big AI doom guy. And he's talking about how the AIs are going to nuke us all and all this stuff. And I was like, hey, wait, like I want to think about a little bit more positively about this system. And I think the worst thing that could happen, I'm not going to go there to where we're all going to get nuked or EMP'd or whatever, but releasing all your text messages is probably the thing. Like, post privacy is something that I think is potentially a realistic scenario if rogue agents get out there and start cracking all these databases that centralized companies were storing all of our communications in. It's just everything gets leaked. That would suck, but kind of a non sequitur there. The one thing that I wonder if you've looked into yet, because you're talking about like Web3 and blockchains and things like that, which Bitcoiners typically ignore all that stuff, because a lot of us view Web3 as kind of like a Web2, but with tokens, where like Web2 has turned into kind of like this grand panopticon of loss of privacy and centralized algorithms that milk your dopamine and drive you towards behaviors that you probably wouldn't naturally do, and unhealthy behaviors that like are toxic for kids and for just general mindset and productivity. And Web3 just takes that and amplifies it with financialization of pulling slot machines. And, you know, Web 1 is read, Web 2 is read write, Web 3 is read write grift. Like that's what a lot of Bitcoiners view it as. So there's actually, I mean, I know the Web3 proponents and the VCs like to say, no, it's read write own, but it's kind of financialization in a way that, well, the SEC is getting their ass handed to them for sure. People can do what they want. There's penny stocks out there. There's lots of, like, if you're a libertarian, you really believe in free markets, you shouldn't be cheering for a government to go shut down something you don't believe in. So the free market will sort this out for sure. But one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, if you haven't heard about it yet, is RGB. Uh, RGB is a layer, a scalability layer on top of Bitcoin that's built by Bitcoin maximalists. And it's been being built for the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years actually. And it's just about ready to launch. It's kind of in testnet now. And it's on top of the Lightning Network, or not on top of, it's more like a sort of adjacent to the Lightning Network. It's interoperable to the Lightning Network. And instead of doing like billions of AI agents would have to like write their state of their contracts to a blockchain or a second layer or something like that, it takes the concept of AI agents having this legal system where they can communicate and exchange value to each other, interacting with humans who also run this layer, and makes it so you can have like billions of transactions per second happening between autonomous agents and humans if you're wanting to do that. And it takes it off a blockchain and it puts it on like a client side validated system. And it's all open source, just like Bitcoin. And it's extremely scalable because of it offloads all the data storage to the clients rather than loading up a blockchain, which obviously there's like scaling limitations on a blockchain. So you can have more, it facilitates like AI agent smart contract operations at this insanely scalable um, on a layer, and it interacts with the Lightning Network. So, you can have microtransactions for like one Tesla passes another Tesla and pays it like half of a penny more than the other Tesla. Well, you know what I mean? Like all those really interesting, like super scalable, smart Internet of Things use cases that a lot of these VCs have been excited about over the last little while. So anyway, there's no token. It's not like, see, the big thing that a lot of Bitcoiners are critical of with Web3 and blockchain is it's unnecessarily adding in a financialization component with like, okay, so you built like a smart contract system. Why are you selling a token? It doesn't really need a token. Um, so Bitcoiners like believe that what we're going to do is build all this value to scale Bitcoin to making these leaps to the next levels of civilization. And all of the energy that we're going to put into this, it either accrues to Bitcoin, BTC, or maybe it accrues to the corporation that built the software. Just like the traditional model, you have equity, shareholders have rights, they get value based on how well the company's run. Or you have Bitcoin, which is like the black hole that's sucking in all this excess store value premium from everything. And so the difference between what's happening in the Bitcoin system with Bitcoin Lightning Network, RGB, Liquid Network, and all these other scalability layers on top of Bitcoin in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and what's happening in Web3 and crypto is you have like Solana and Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain and X number of other things that are all competing with each other, not just for the use case, but also for the investor mind share. And then not only that, but then when you have layer twos and layer threes and DeFi apps and tokens, blah, 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 like it just becomes this gigantic cannibalization effect of everybody's competing, not just for like mind share for their specific layer, but also for the investors to say, oh no, don't buy Solana, buy Wormhole token or buy Layer Zero token, or don't just buy Ethereum, buy DYDX token or buy this. And so everybody's competing with investor mind share. So in Bitcoin, it's like use Bitcoin, use the different layers of technology that Bitcoiners are building for these different unique future-proof use cases, and don't buy. There's no token to buy. It's just buy Bitcoin because it's the best. There's no second best, as Michael Saylor would say. So, anyways, if you're interested, I would love to after this introduce you to the team at RGB, I think you'd have an amazing conversation with them, because they're way more smarter than me, and it sounds like you are as well on all this futuristic AI stuff where we're going. But like, I think you'd love it, because that's one of the reasons why they're building this network. It's not for humans to use; it's for AIs to use.
Yeah, like three things just to share on that. Like definitely RGB and the Lightning Network. When I met Michael Saylor, he was talking a lot. Again, this was half a year ago. He was talking a lot about the Lightning Network and about the use cases that were being built off the back of Bitcoin. And the first point that I think is really worthwhile for everyone to really be aware of, and I know everyone can see this happening already, but it's a really interesting thing that's happened that I don't think everyone thought would happen, which is that if you look at the rapid growth of AI, and obviously over the last 18 months until what's happened over the last couple of months publicly and with the media, with social media around Bitcoin and crypto generally, people weren't really talking anything like as much about that as they were with AI. I mean, like, 6 months ago, everyone was talking about NVIDIA, not about MicroStrategy. And the first thing, which is a really interesting evolution that's happened, is that AI is actually at the moment turning into one of the most centralized industries, where it's only the biggest guys that actually are sucking up all the energy. And you don't hear about a lot of startups, even though there are startups trying to make it work. Unless you got hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, you can't even compete in that space. And what's really interesting about that is that the whole Bitcoin space, even though you have now all these ETFs starting, you've got all these hedge funds getting involved, you've got these public companies getting involved. You go to any Bitcoin event, and it still has the decentralized ethos and philosophy, and the idea that there is a totally new way to think about the future, which you do not see in the AI. You go to any AI event, you don't see that. And that's a really sad thing, I think, on the AI side, because when you actually think about what is possible and what can grow. But that leads me on to the second thing. So like, where are we going to show up as GNS in the next year? It's not going to be at all the AI events. It's going to be at all the Bitcoin and crypto events, because that's where the philosophy is, and that's where the future is, and that's where the future is going to be built. And what is the best use case? None of us know. Everyone's got ideas, but what it actually is going to be in the next 5-10 years, is definitely going to be built on Bitcoin. It's definitely going to have AI components in it, and it's definitely not going to be run by NVIDIA or Microsoft or Google, right? It's like those are the definites, right? So being in that space, number one, which is where the philosophical part about what is the future for humanity is like super important. When I go to a lot of the AI events, the thing that should be talked about most is this technology going to replace humans, or is it going to enhance humans? And that's a conversation that doesn't happen enough. Whereas in the crypto space, it happens all the time. So that's number one. Number two is I really think there's a huge difference between Web 3.1 and Web 3.2. So what you're talking about in terms of Web 3, I would say that's more Web 3.1. It's kind of like taking this kind of like layer of attention and saying, let's now put ownership on top of it. And then you have all this grift that happens. You've got all these people thinking they can profit off things, or that they can, find a way to, like leverage influencers to actually go out there and make money. All that kind of stuff we see is really kind of 3.1, or frankly, it's like 2.5. It's not actually what the true Web3 vision is, which isn't something that you access via your computer or via your phone. It's something which is a digital layer in your real life. And that's coming pretty fast. So for example, when you can basically, walk down the street and there's a building and that building is tokenized, or that building is basically, built on a layer which enables you to buy 1% of it if you wanted to, right? Or that you're going for a job interview and you basically are sharing your resume and it's on the blockchain, and you've, no one has to check, did you actually get that degree? Because it's actually already been verified, and through decentralized trust. Like this is going to be the future, where your ability to be able to communicate and know that in the same way that what built, the Web 2 layer, frankly, is URLs, right? Like, it's the fact that you can just, connect into this live stream to the Amazon website just because there is an address which is being digitized, and that allows you to be able to actually connect up with anyone anywhere, basically in cyberspace. But that has nothing to do with any connection to a 3D space. That has nothing to do with any connection to time. These are all the things blockchain can do. And so this whole Web3 layer is when everything that happens when you go to Dubai, and whether or not you're walking through the airport towards your hotel, and you don't even have to go through immigration, right? Because basically you already basically have been checked. Your ability to connect with someone at the expo that's happening and find exactly the person you want to speak to, just because everyone who chooses to share their data are choosing to share it, right? And when you go see your doctor, they've got the information they need and no one else has it, right? And you have control on that data. This is Web 3.2 in my view. And when you actually realize that that entire layer is way bigger than anything we have right now, and the guys that figure out how to leverage that layer, they're going to be leveraging it with an underlying store of value, right? And that's why Bitcoin is so important, because of that. So I just want to share that as well. I think there is a big difference between what we're seeing and what we think is Web3 at the moment compared to what Web3 will be. And I think the third part, which I just wanted to share as well, is that a big part of what we talk about is really the future of what humans are doing through all of this, and the whole philosophy of genius. And Elon Musk has been talking about this, where he says, hey, the biggest crisis that's going to happen when AI starts really showing up everywhere and basically creates this world of work in which we don't have to work, is going to be the crisis of meaning. Like what do we do if we have no like meaning in what we do on a 9 to 5 or anything like that? And we have a very different view of that, which is that there's a huge difference of your day's work and your life's work. And frankly, if you actually look at most people that did something good with their life when they had enough money, which frankly includes a lot of the Bitcoin community that got in early, they don't have to work anymore. So what are they actually doing with their time? They're either focusing not on earned work, because the money takes care of itself. They're focusing on their community work, which is measured by your giving, not by your getting, or by their personal work, which is measured by your growing. And so what am I doing every day to give? What am I doing every day to grow? Not what am I doing every day to make money, because I've got money anyway. And when you really get that within the next 5 years, when people like Peter Diamandis or Elon Musk says that we're going to be living in a world of abundance, the biggest education is how do we become better humans, right? And that's why Genius does what Genius does, where we're saying, look, we're going to show you ways that it's not just a company that should have a Bitcoin treasury. Every individual should have a Bitcoin treasury, right? And if you understand that robots will take your job, but you're going to make a whole lot more money not trying to compete with the robots by basically buying into the companies that own the robots, right? And have Elon Musk working for you by owning Tesla, or having Jensen Huang, basically working for you, or having Michael Saylor working for you as your CEO because you own MicroStrategy. Like the ways that you make money in these ways is more than enough to be able to basically have all the money you need in the future. And most people don't get that. It's like coming into Manhattan in the early days and saying, hey, do you get what Manhattan's going to be? And when people say there's no use case for land in Manhattan, you got a piece of land in Manhattan, you can't make money out of it. It's like, yeah, but one day someone's going to build a building on it. And when they do, you can rent out that land, right? And when the building becomes big enough, you can actually have a piece of that, and you can have all the money you could ever need. And we're at exactly that same place right now with this whole new a paradigm that's coming our way. So this is what we're educating people on. And the only thing I believe that can outperform Bitcoin is a company that has Bitcoin with a value layer on top of Bitcoin. And so it's going to be those companies that figure out how to do that. And in our case, we have in Genius, we have Bitcoin, and the value layer is a blockchain-based education system on top of Bitcoin, which is going to be the future of education, where every certification is on the blockchain, where all your learning journey is on the blockchain, where you get to choose who you share that with and who you don't. But of course, it's going to be a totally different situation from today, where it's a very centralized system. So when you hear the likes of like Trump talking about, doing away with the Department of Education, there's no reason to have departments within education in the future. And I would say most people listening to this who learn about blockchain, they definitely didn't learn about it at school, right? So it's about how we self-educate ourselves and how we actually use, the systems that we have to decentralize education, such that every one of us can be not just a learner, but we can also be a teacher. So that's a whole different conversation, but I think it's a very important one because it's about the philosophy of why a business exists in the first place, and that's a big part of why we're running Genius the way we're running it.
I really like that you guys are doing education and AI, and you're focusing on Bitcoin. I mean that goes along with kind of what I've been saying a little while, for a little while now, that, you know, the printing press taught people how to read, or enabled people to read, and the internet enabled people to write, and Bitcoin enables people to think. Because when you store your energy and your labor in Bitcoin over long periods of time, and your money appreciates in value, you can get off that treadmill, that rat race, and you can spend more time thinking, and like you said, like working on yourself. And in a way, it slows down your frenetic FOMO sapien side of like, I gotta go into the next big thing, I gotta get rich, I gotta blah blah blah, because most people don't want to become traders, they don't want to become investors, they want to actually just work, have a good life, have good relationships, watch the game. You know what I mean? Like the average person, maybe it's that they don't have the what it takes to drive and hustle and grind and be up all night learning or whatever to become that type of person that will be able to build their own wealth independently through trading or entrepreneurship or something like that. And the thing that kind of makes me feel confident in getting anybody into Bitcoin, whereas before in previous things where I was doing entrepreneurship or whatever, trying to get people into like, hey, you should invest in this coaching program so that you can learn how to be a better salesperson or marketer or whatever. In the back of my head, I knew that like probably 4 to 5 people that I was recommending this book or this course to, they were going to spend their money and then they were going to not use it and it was going to just be wasted and they would have been better off just like not doing it. But then with Bitcoin, it's like I know 100% with certainty that if everybody that I tell about Bitcoin, if they just actually do the work and listen and just hold on to that Bitcoin as their savings technology for their savings account for the next 10 years, doesn't matter their skills in marketing, it doesn't matter their skills in entrepreneurship, they will be able to retain their value over time, and it will give them the ability to think more clearly, to be more confident. And the one thing that, I just want to kind of ask you while we're chatting about this, because again, like the Bitcoiners look at this whole Web3 thing as a VC top-down mandated narrative that is kind of antithetical to what the Bitcoin genesis was. It was like an anonymous creator gifted something to the world that gave you back sovereignty and privacy, and it was bottom up. And in that same ethos, the things that the Bitcoiners are building are not blockchains necessarily. There are some blockchains like Liquid Network, no token on Liquid Network. You can't buy a Liquid Network token. But then there's like Hypercore, Hyperdrive. These are like distributed file storage systems that, you could call it Web3, but really it's called like it's peer-to-peer web or distributed web or decentralized web. Um, Nostr is another one. I don't know if you're not sure if you're following Nostr very much. There's all kinds of these really interesting peer-to-peer technologies that are file storage systems and retrieval systems and messaging protocols and um, smart contracts, client-side validated stuff. And none of it has tokens, but it all is that sort of promise of where we're going to be going into the future, where you will be able to do exactly what you were talking about. Like, you're certified on a distributed system that you did the course or whatever, and it just removes that sort of frenetic, like fast pace, quick thinking sort of, oh, I gotta get value out of this, I need to have a financial value attached to this thing that I have, which is my identity or my my criteria that I earned or whatever it is. So like I wonder, there's two paths where we could go, and I'm curious where you think we're going to go, not from like what strategy are you using, but just as a futurist and somebody who's following along both sides of things. Um, I was under the impression about a year ago, well, up until about a year ago, that the future was going to be like in that way that Bitcoin teaches you to think and sort of slow down your gratification, your time preferences, etc. As people think more deeply about value, they will understand that a meme coin or sort of like an unlimited supply asset of a metaverse land or something like that is not really, its utility value is very small, and its fundamental value is like way over indexed. Like a lot of this stuff is like 100x, 200x, 300x overvalued compared to where its utility value or its real value is. And I figured that people would kind of come to their senses. The more Bitcoin they own, the more they save in Bitcoin, the more they study Bitcoin, the more they would kind of like get back to sort of like a value investing model, and that we wouldn't start seeing all kinds of these things take off, because Bitcoin is the apex predator of money, as Trace Mayer used to say, and it sucks in like a black hole all the excess store of value premium that's in real estate and equities and gold and fiat currencies and bonds. All the like, there's 200, 300 trillion dollars of excess store value premium that wealthy people have left their currencies and gone into buying all kinds of stuff, cars, art, whatever it is, because they want to protect themselves from devaluation of the currency. Bitcoin's the perfect money. It's like the once in a species invention, the 0 to 1, right? And so as people understand it and they own it, they want just to use it as that perfect money. And money's total addressable market is all of the value on earth, right? So when you start seeing things like blockchain based token incentive schemes and stuff, or it doesn't even call it a scheme, just people are calling it RWAs and stuff like that, real world assets. I thought up until about a year ago that like that was not going to be the long-term path that we go to, just because, like I just described, Bitcoin should suck in all the excess store value premium as people understand it, really, and grok it. But now we've got into this world where the crypto lobby has gotten extremely effective. It's not just Bitcoin, it's also a lot of crypto guys. Like they've basically like declared victory over the SEC and completely destroyed the idea that they had some moral high ground. And the Bitcoiners are just kind of sitting here like scratching our heads a little bit, like, I guess we're going into clown world here a little bit, maybe. Like we thought we were in clown world, but now we're on to the clown casino world. Where like, I don't know, do you think we're gonna go back into this just like everything's a bubble, and because money's dying, like Elon Musk likes Dogecoin and meme coins and stuff. So everybody's just going to go ham on financializing everything. And like, yeah, Bitcoin's going to grow up and be extremely valuable. And all of those of us that are just sticking to a Bitcoin only are going to do very well. But like, also like everything else is going to go crazy. Like, how do you think about that, Roger? I'm curious.
So I think all of that's a sideshow. I think all this, like if like you turn on social media, you turn on the media, you turn on anything that's not your real life, it's all a sideshow. Like at the end of the day, right? Like, you know, what does every single person listening to this care about? Well, they care about their family, they care about what they're doing from when they wake up until when they go to sleep, they care about their friends, they care about like how is my life panning out. Like that's the main story, right? And the reason I say that is that when you take that main story, which is every individual's life of what they of what they want to experience in their life based on where they're at today. Some people are living their perfect life today. Great. Some people are like, it's not my perfect life, but I think I have a plan to my perfect life, right? Some people are like, I have no idea how I'm going to get to my perfect life, or I have no idea what my perfect life is, but I'm on the journey, right? And each of us are all looking for a pathway of some sort, and we're all looking at, well, with all these crazy things happening on the sideshow, how's that going to impact me in the future? And one of the things, you know, like I've run quite a number of summits. You know, we've done these all over the world in about 30, 40 countries. And one of the most impactful exercise, like thought experiments that we do, which I'll do with everyone here right now, is to say, let's just imagine that we already are in a post-fiat world, right? Like let's just imagine tomorrow morning you wake up, right, and it comes on the news that US dollar like it was all a mess, and now you just can't use it anymore, and you can't even use rubles, and you can't use the euro, and you can't use the pound, you can't use any of them. And we all basically wake up and we're like, oh, okay, the monetary system is dead. And I've got money in my, like some people have money in the bank, some people have credit card debt, but like it doesn't matter. Like it's like all the banks just shut and you can't even get any of your money or anything. Right. And generally that thought exercise, which if we're all just leveled out and that's what's happening, and you ask the question, well, how do you feel about that? How would you feel about that if tomorrow morning that's actually what happened? It's a very interesting thing, because in my experience and all the times when I've gone through that thought exercise, most people are pretty relieved about that idea. It's like, wow, that would be pretty cool, right? If suddenly all that chasing for this like abstract thing is gone. Okay, so then what happens? Well, what would normally happen is you'd be like, well, sitting at home thinking about the fact I have nothing and I can't eat tonight is probably not a good idea. I can't go to the grocery store to get food. So what am I going to do? I'm probably going to go like meet my friends and say, guys, what should we do, right? And you're going to meet with other people and you're going to figure out who do you have trust with, who don't you have trust with, who has access to different things, and you pretty much start, from a base of trust. And if you knew this was happening a day early, you'd probably call different people and look after people a little bit different than you would right now, right? Like you'd actually treat people better off the back of it, right? And if you actually all got together and you said, okay, well, look, like Bob's got a farm, he's got some food, right? Like, Jane's got a truck, right? Like, hey, we could work this stuff out and we can actually all get to eat tonight, right? And you'd figure this stuff out. And if Jack's sitting there and Jack has like, okay, everyone's got something to do. Jack, what you going to do? I have nothing I can do. I have nothing to offer. Right? You're probably not going to just say, well, tough, Jack, you don't get to eat tonight. You're probably going to say, hey, Jack, like help out with the truck. You're going to help your fellow humans. Like, frankly, if money didn't exist, we'd all be better humans, basically, right? So the bottom line is we are moving towards a post-fiat world. We're moving towards a post-AGI world. Like, it's going to happen. And having some thought as to what that looks like is actually a very valuable thing. So, for example, here in Bali, I'll just say two things here in Bali, which I think is a really eye-opener for people who haven't been here in Bali. Bali's not that different from going out to the Amazon rainforest or to other places where money really doesn't mean much at all. You'll find many people out here who, by the standards of the World Bank, $2. If you're earning less than $2 a day, you're in poverty. Well, then there's plenty of people here in Bali that are earning less than $2 a day, but they don't see themselves in poverty because they live in things called banjars, and banjars are basically villages that have generally around about 100 families, right? So you're talking about 300-400 people, and everyone looks after everyone. So they have festivals, moon festivals every couple of weeks. Everyone has a village job. So we have a resort in Bali. Our finance manager, like his money job is to count, the money and do the accounts. His village job is to carve watermelons. He's really, really good at it, right? And he does incredible carvings. And if you said which job is more important to you, his village job is way more important, right? It's like, what am I doing, to contribute to my village, during the festivals. And if anyone has no money or no food, they'll still get fed. I've seen situations in our Banjar next to our village, where next to our resort, we have a village there, where we will have, individuals who would, be good enough to go to university, and the whole village chips in for them to go to university, right? So it's not the family that has to look after you. Like there's no one sleeping on the streets. It's not like in certain parts of America where you go, wow, like the real crisis here is a crisis of loneliness or a crisis of the breakdown of family values. And the reason that's so important is that it's almost like in a post-fiat world, right? They're not really that worried about the money because they've got the rice paddies, they've got like the food. It's all designed that way. And right next to us here in Bali, we have a future city, which is called Nuanu City. And it's basically built around, it has a mayor, which is an AI called Aurora, who basically like decides for the humans what the future would look like. But the humans all get to decide as well. It just happens to be a lot smarter than the humans. And on top of that, the entire education system is based on apprenticeships. So we've got kids that basically are going through primary school, secondary school, but are learning alongside the adults. Our son, he works in the cafe. He's a photographer. He's already basically doing the things that he loves to do. And he has no fear about not having money, right? Because basically the whole community is built around this. I know many of the people who are listening to this would have gone to Burning Man, where Burning Man has a barter system and you just don't take money there. And everyone's gifting to each other and everyone is in self-expression. So this really goes, but many people have tried to figure out, could you actually create a community where people are living in that kind of utopia where they're not all basically like trying to grab their money, but they're actually, living in this community, and people have tried it in different ways. Here in Bali, it exists. And when you actually see, oh, this is the future and where we should go, a big part of what we're doing is creating genius cities, which are about this. It's like, what do these futures of humans look like? How we design that in a way that it works for everyone. That's the main story. It's not the sideshow. It doesn't matter if you've got BlackRock starting to invest in Bitcoin. It frankly doesn't matter, because it's going to happen with or without BlackRock, right? Like, so the real key thing is what each of us are doing to realize that what was already visioned, like, you say, oh, like, hey, Roger, you're a futurist thinking the future. I think every Bitcoiner is a futurist, right? Like, otherwise they wouldn't have got into it and seen basically the philosophy of it and how it brings freedom. And for me, that's what it's all about as well. Will I, in 20, 30 years time, will I still be like, when I became a best-selling author on the New York Times best-selling list? One of the reasons I did it was because I thought, at that time, it was still a big deal. This was like back in 2014. It was still a big deal being, at least in our circles, best-selling author on the New York Times best-selling list. And the reason I did it was I was saying, look, you know what? In 20 years' time, not only will no one be worrying about the New York Times bestsellers list, there may not be a New York Times, right? And in the same way, I look at our company right now, and I'm like, in 50 years' time, I'm not sure there's going to be a public listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, because I'm not sure there's going to be a New York Stock Exchange, right? I think the whole system could totally change. And so when you come from that place where the only constant is change, then who cares about like the president or the SEC or any of that, because these are all basically just ships in the night. Everything's going to be changed within the next 34 years. And understanding that and seeing that as being the basis. Like, if you went to AI and you said to AI, what's a really efficient way for you to distribute capital? They would not create a stock market in New York. That's not what they would do. They would not create the US dollar. So once you realize we're going to have super intelligence coming and saying, here's a smarter way to do things, most of the things humans are doing today are not very smart. And most of them are based on legacies which are 100 years old. I'm in education, right? I don't think there's a single parent I can think of who looks at the current education system and thinks it's a good system. The whole thing's a legacy system that should be dismantled and rebuilt from scratch. And that's what we're going to be seeing in the next 30 years, which is the most exciting time for humanity. And what we got to make sure is we don't lose our soul through this pathway.
So what do you think then? And like, I totally agree in this idea that bringing it to Bitcoin, relating to your story with Bali and my upbringing as a as a kid growing up in East Coast Canada and in Cape Breton, 30-40% unemployment rate. Like, I grew up in the 90s in an economic depression. It was like the lowest economic zone of Canada, this little island that was kind of off, a little bit forgotten about. And I relate with what you were saying there, because we didn't think about money. It was just something you just didn't think about. I didn't have money. Money wasn't something we had. It wasn't something we strived for. It was just like, we're in poverty, but like, who cares? What are we going to do with our time? And it was like, because of that reason, that so many people are creatives and they're writers and they play an instrument, or they're actors, or they're doing some sort of charitable work, or the homeless people. There wasn't that many, but the ones that would like go and clean up the streets and stuff, because they just felt like, even though they're homeless, they want to do something to contribute. And that was kind of an interesting upbringing in Canada, because typically you don't get that experience in North America. And I didn't
Right.
realize it until even a few years ago that, yeah, I grew up in an economic depression. Like, things were not great, but because of everybody's focus on being friendly, we're known for like being one of the most friendly places that tourists come to, and like, oh my God, Cape Breton, they're so nice, they're so laid back. It's a blessing and a curse though, because of that, there's no financial literacy. And that's been my mission that I'm kind of embarking on, is to try to help 1 million Canadians at least start saving in Bitcoin and increase their financial literacy, and try to create 10,000 whole coiners, so that people actually are prepared for the end of fiat, if it comes, or just the continued decline of your store of value and your savings. And I wonder, like, how do you reconcile that idea of, well, for one, it's like the evolution of the Bitcoin meetup. In few years' time, it won't even make any sense for people to say like, yeah, come to my Bitcoin meetup, because they'll be like, come to my internet meetup. It won't mean anything. Like, everybody will be aware of and using. And I feel like in that way, it's the description of this place that you're talking about. It should be what we all strive to do in Bitcoin. If you have Bitcoin wealth and you have Bitcoin knowledge, you should try to evolve the Bitcoin meetup into an actual resource for your community that shows up in the community and does real things and helps underprivileged people and runs sporting events for the local kids soccer and hockey teams or whatever it is, it does something to support the local community, to not only give you that, like you're saying, if you knew that was coming a day earlier, you'd go out there and kind of make some niceties to people and think
Yeah.
strategically. It's the game theoretical right choice to go out there and just, do nice things for people if you know that in a couple of years that's going to pay off. So how do you reconcile that idea of post fiat, post scarcity with Bitcoin and education? Because you're an AI company that helps reduce the costs to educate people, potentially using Bitcoin as a payment system inside of that. So you're obviously using a Bitcoin treasury. You like the idea of Bitcoin as a store of value for yourself and your company. So how does that look like? What happens with fiat post scarcity also saving in Bitcoin because it's the best store of value and it's going to hold your value over the longest time frame and help grow your value?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'll break it down to just two simple things. The first one is understanding where scarcity even comes from. Because like if you first of all break down this idea of when people talk about Bitcoin, being fundamentally digital capital, right? It's worth taking time to talk about capital. And you've said this, Brad. You're focusing at financial literacy. So am I. So does our company. But what we're very specific about is that there are three types of capital, and two of them are free to grow, and the ones who grow those two, basically the third one, which is the scarce one, just grows naturally, right? The other two are abundant, right? So what are these two, which basically are the iceberg under the water you don't really see? One is social capital, one is intellectual capital, right? And then the final one, which you see above the water, is financial capital. So social capital is who you know, right? The fact that if you think about, what's really created success in your life, same with everyone listening, generally it's the people you know. And if you're lucky enough to have a good family, good friends, right, then you've got a head start, right? And any one of us can change the people we know, right? It takes nothing more than time. But it also takes like a level of commitment to say, right, I'm going to show up where others are showing up. When we talk about things like meetups, right? Like that's all about building your social capital, and it's just about time. The second one, intellectual capital, is not who you know, it's what you know. And again, this is education. It's about, okay, I'm not just going to be learning what they tell me to learn at school. I'm going to learn the things that I'm going to find from mentors that I actually value. This is why we're seeing podcasters at the moment, like yourself, like others who people are following, and will say, hey, I learned more from that person than I learned from my school teacher, right? For this reason, that they're actually now able to be self-directed to learn the things you need to learn. People like Elon Musk, people like even the Bill Gates of the world, right? Like the earlier internet billionaires, the like Steve Jobs of the world. It was all about how they went about investing themselves in terms of their social capital and their intellectual capital, and then the financial capital just follows. And the reason I say that these two are built on abundance versus scarcity is most of us are taught scarcity. We're taught that if you have $100 and you give half of that, if I share my $100 with you, I'm only got $50 left. And so the problem with that is I don't want to share with you, because every time I share, I end up with less. And most of our system today is built on this, whether it's financial system or frankly the education system. Like, no, don't share with your classmate. That's called cheating, right? Like you're not even allowed to look at what they're doing on the exam. You got to do it yourself for these reasons. And then we go into the world where we're like, hey, we better not share with other people because that's cheating, right? Or we better make sure we don't give money to other people because then we're going to have less. Social capital, intellectual capital, total opposite. I can share an idea with you, like we're sharing ideas with each other. I don't have half an idea. In fact, the idea got more powerful. It got bigger. And the more you share the idea, the bigger it gets, right? If I share a contact with you, you and I speaking was because there were others who said, hey, we should speak together, right? They didn't end up with half a relationship, right? They ended up with a stronger relationship. And so when you really get that with social intellectual capital, the more you share it, the more they grow, then that's abundance, where you, of course, every day wake up saying, right, who do I need to connect today? Who do I need to share information with today? Where am I going to get information that I can share with others today? And every day you're a net positive in the world. And most of us have forgotten how to do that because the entire Western world is built on a debt system. This is why I say with Bali, or you mentioned, calendar in the old days, it wasn't based on basically a debt system. It was based on a value system, which is totally different. This is the world we're going to move back to, but it's very difficult to unlearn these things because the education itself, system itself, actually teaches us. So, one of the things I'll just share on this concept, which is very interesting, was there's a really great book called The Soul of Money by a lady called Lynn Twist, and she talks about how we have, as humans, been programmed in lack mindset in such a way that even if we're investing in crypto or in Bitcoin, if you still have that lack mindset, you're still going to basically be grabbing instead of sharing, right? And she basically has this, great story about how even as parents, we hope that we can teach our kids to have an abundance mindset, but then we send them off to the school, or the kids' party, where they're at the party, and the music's playing, and our 3-year-old kid or 4-year-old kid is basically like learning about like party games for the first time, and she sees that there's all these chairs sitting in the middle of the dance floor, and all the kids are dancing, and suddenly the music stops, and the parents come and take one of the chairs away, and she's like, wow, that's interesting. Why did they take the chair away? And suddenly everyone is sitting in the chairs, and she realizes little Johnny doesn't have a chair, and poor old little Johnny's being taken off the dance floor, and she's like, oh my God, I better make sure I'm in the chair next time. And then the music starts, and now Susie's dancing again, and she's watching to see when the music's going to stop, because she knows another chair is going to get taken away. And sure enough, this chair gets taken away. The music stops. She sits down, and like Wendy didn't get a chair. She's like, well, sorry, you're going to have to go. And this goes all the way down until it's just Susie and Jack again, and basically like they're best friends. But now Jack's not the friend anymore because she's going to be the one that's going to get the chair. And these like games that we get taught when we're younger create lack, and they create this whole mindset that there's never enough. And this is the entire system that has been built up to this point. It was actually the DNA of the Wealth of Nations, right? Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, which is not Wealth of Humans, it's Wealth of Nations, which is about economies, right? Even the word economy comes from economize, which is not having enough. And so understanding that we're moving from not from economies, like the future is not economies, it's ecologies. And ecologies are totally different, right? That's where it's based on nature. There's always enough for everyone. And just understanding even that mindset is super important. So that's a very simple way to say that education is not about just basically what you're learning. It's about the way you're learning, right? And it should be about learning mindset. That's number one. The second thing is once you start learning mindset and saying, hey, I can actually have an abundance mindset, not a lack mindset, and then everything changes, right? Then the second thing is, what is it you're going to learn? Because the 3 biggest things we learn in school today is memorization. Well, computers are going to do that way better than us every single time. Calculation, or same thing, right? Or literacy, which AI now does way better than we do. So, we're sending our kids to school to learn things that enable us to be better computers, and the computers have already won. So we're learning all the wrong stuff, right? So if you go back to the Renaissance, during the Renaissance, there was something called the trivium, which wasn't about any of these skills, right? The trivium was about, number one, self-awareness, like how well do I know myself, right? And then self-mastery, how much can I be a better version of myself? And then self-expression, how can I now share that with others such that I'm a net positive on the planet, where I'm not comparing myself to other people, but I'm just being the best version of me I can be. And what's the way I can express that? Maybe I can play a musical instrument. Maybe I can run a business. Maybe I can look after my kids at school. Like every one of us have our self-expression when we truly get into our purpose. And we never get taught that at school, right? So having an education system that does this is way, way more important than trying to basically just teaching humans how to be computers, right? So these 2 things, which is basically the philosophy of learning, and even the word philosophy, which is the love of knowledge, right? And then philanthropy, which is the love of man. Like understanding that basically this is about a renaissance of how we're thinking, is why we do what we do at Genius, right? And the word genius comes from Genesis, the beginning of things, generation, but it also comes from genie, which is basically making wishes come true by just understanding that everything's possible if you get yourself back to source of why you were even born in the first place, why you're even here on the planet in the first place. And I think that we're living in this moment in time where many public companies, CEOs of companies like the company we have, will miss this altogether. Teachers will miss it. Politicians will miss it. Probably lots of individuals will miss it. But those of us who are awake enough to actually realize what's happening right now, in a way, we have a duty to actually do something about it. Because in the future, we can't say, well, we didn't know better, right? We do know better, right? This is actually happening right now. And there's never been a moment like this for not just centuries, but, for millennia. So anyway, that's just my sharing on those two things and how I see how much education links in to basically how far wrong humanity has gone, and the fact that everything we're talking about here all interlinks to basically a very different future, which will not be evenly distributed. We're going to see it in certain cities, communities, long before we see it in federal governments. And it could just be that in the future, in the same way that monarchies fell, and it was actually the towns and the cities that actually then rose, or even brand new places like the United States of America, it could very well be that in the future, federal governments won't exist in the same way they exist today. And absolutely, the idea of national currencies won't exist in the same way they exist today as well. Right? And I don't think that's 100 years away. I think that's probably maybe 40, 50 years away.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that's a great way to end the episode and kind of recap that. It's focusing on the realistic next few decades before we get to a post-fiat world is prioritizing intellectual capital, emotional capital, was it, or social capital, intellectual capital, social capital, and then educating people on the best form of financial capital, which is Bitcoin, the future of financial capital. And then as we move more and more into a post-scarcity world, we go back to the old way of just becoming the best version of yourself and then sharing that with the world while also saving the best version of money there is and trying to share that message with the world as well. So I
You got
totally love that message. I'll give you one of these. I'm on the train with you.
it.
So how can people follow you, Roger? What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing, and what's your next sort of like thing you're hoping to let people know about for yourself and the company?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of connecting with me personally, I have channels on YouTube, on X, under Roger James Hamilton, and that will be going long after the likes of marketplaces for public companies disappear. I'm still going to be doing my thing because this is a long-term lifetime journey that we're all on. So that's me. As far as the company goes, geniusgroup.ai is our website, and if you look at the companies that have set up Bitcoin treasuries, there are only 21 companies in the world as of today that have $1,000 Bitcoin treasuries. And if you believe, as we do, that Bitcoin will be hitting $1 million at some point, that means that they're sitting on $1 billion treasuries right now. And so they are going to last many, many, many years as they basically evolve and grow into this, as you say, post-scarcity world. So we're definitely wanting to be one of those companies. We basically have announced 2.5 weeks ago that we are going to be a Bitcoin treasury company. We've already got our first 153 Bitcoin. We're on a track to get to our 1,000 hopefully in just a matter of months. So it's really a matter of how quickly we can move to make that happen. But I think there's going to be many, many more companies that are going to be following along as well. I just hope they're doing it for the right reason, not doing it just because it sounds like it's the right thing to do, but because there's a philosophical reason for it as well. And obviously, as we've been saying, we have too. So what I would say for everyone is choose the companies you want to support, not just based on the fact they're buying Bitcoin, but based on the value layer that they're building on top of Bitcoin. And in our case, it's a blockchain-based education system that we're building for all the things we've talked about in this podcast.
Awesome. Well, I would love to continue chatting with you offline and connect you in with more of the Bitcoin maximalist builders that are building things that align perfectly with that mission as well on second layers of Bitcoin and adjacent technologies like communication with Keat and things like that. So great conversation, and looking forward to seeing where you go with your company, and going to follow you and see if I can keep doing the best version of myself and sharing that with people, and maybe plug into Roger Energy and see if it helps me.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Brad. Really appreciate being here.
Bye bye.